From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kyle Peterson and Kim Strassel. And let's talk about the article by ProPublica, which is continuing its campaign, as I see it, against the conservative Supreme Court justices. The latest justice to get the treatment is Samuel Alito. ProPublica was reporting a story that the justice went on a fishing trip to Alaska in 2008, 15 years ago. And as part of that trip, one of the legs, he took a ride on a private plane by Paul Singer, who is the hedge fund executive, and didn't report that on his disclosure form. And that article alleges that this is a violation of federal rules. It is not, in my estimation, as we'll explain. But the same article went after Justice Antonin Scalia for not reporting a trip he took in 2005 to Alaska. The interesting thing here, though, is that we published his response to the 18 questions that the reporters for ProPublica asked him. And we did so because the answers were relevant to the questions and gave the justice a chance to lay out in full his explanation, which I assume the justice felt would not get full enough treatment by ProPublica. We were happy to publish it. The fact that it came before the ProPublica article was actually published seems to be a source of consternation for much of the press corps. We thought it was actually news, and that's the business we're in. Sorry, folks. We scooped you again. And in fact, when the article did come out, it validated everything, and our decision to publish, in my mind, was the right one. Kyle, what do you make of all this?
Well, on the point about it being news, I think that is exactly right. If you're a Supreme Court justice, he could have called a press conference and given his full explanation, read his full statement, and I think the Supreme Court reporters would have definitely covered that, even if it came before the ProPublica article was published. And I get that it's a bummer if you're a reporter and you're working on something and the subject decides to front run you. I recently had that happen in something I was working on.
You did, in fact. Yeah, you did.
And so it is a bummer, but that is also PR 101 is the people who are advising any corporation CEO is to get the story out there first, get it out so you can put it on your terms and hope that you are the one who gets the media pickup, not the critical thing that is coming. And so I agree. If you imagine the tables turned here, I think other op-ed editors would have run something from a liberal justice, trying to get ahead of some story on them. On the merits, I think there's a lack of clear thinking on this question about disclosure. And beyond the fishing trip, now CNN today has a story explaining that Justice Alito gave a speech in Rome for the Notre Dame's Religious Liberty Initiative. And during that speech, he thanked the group for its warm hospitality, including the hotel stay that it provided him. And what is the danger that we're really supposed to be guarding against here? There are a lot of people in the world who give paid speeches. Supreme Court justices are not allowed to give paid speeches, but they're allowed to take airfare. They're allowed to take a hotel room or reimbursement for that to attend some of these events. They're not cloistered monks. And as far as quote unquote bias goes, what about things like the fact that Justice Elena Kagan was a dean and professor at Harvard University, and we're now waiting for the affirmative action case on Harvard University's racial preferences? You'd think that she would have a much greater interest in that. And I'm not saying she should recuse.
But we're confusing things here a little bit. Okay. The Justice Kagan point is about recusal, right? Okay. Whether a justice should step back from a case. That's sort of part two of the ProPublica charge, that because the man who gave Alito the ride on this private jet was Paul Singer, who runs a hedge fund whose companies then had cert petitions before the court that were rejected. And then one case that was heard by the court, 7-1 decision, Alito was in the majority, but obviously his opinion was not decisive, or his vote. And the accusation is that he should have recused himself. I want to take that up second. But first is this issue of disclosure. Should Alito have disclosed this? And under the rules that prevailed at the time for the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary, somebody did not have to report what were called personal hospitality and private plane trips qualified as personal hospitality under the rules at the time as Ray Randolph, an appellate court judge who was on both of the trips that we've described, got advice to that effect from the judicial conference. So that's one issue, and I think that is overplayed. The recusal point, Kyle, that's where Kagan comes in. And if you're going to recuse somebody, you're going to force a Supreme Court justice to recuse themselves in the attenuated circumstances that apply to Singer, then the Kagan analogy comes in because she was a dean of the Harvard Law School, and now she's hearing a case about Harvard's admissions practices.
Right. And there's also been complaints lodged in the press that there are billionaires who are on the boards of think tanks, and those think tanks file amicus briefs before the Supreme Court, and the billionaire knows a justice. And so that justice should have to recuse on that basis. But then you're setting up a situation where anybody can get any justice to recuse. If you know one of the justices, you give some money to a think tank, the think tank files an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, and then that justice is supposed to recuse from that case. You can sort of pick and choose the justices that you want to knock out. And like I said, I think there's a lack of clear thinking about what exactly the threat is here. And I think you have to have some faith in the fact that these are judges who take an oath of office, and they take an oath of office seriously. And there are similar things floating around about Justice Sonia Sotomayor didn't recuse from a case involving the publisher of her book. And honestly, I'm skeptical. I don't think that affected Sotomayor's thinking on the merits of that case.
I couldn't agree more with you. I don't think either liberal justices should recuse themselves in the circumstances. But where I disagree with Kyle, I think there's a lot of clear thinking going on here. And that clear thinking is we don't really care about these ethics issues. It isn't about ethics. All we want is to discredit the conservative justices, discredit this Supreme Court, and if possible, use the recusal power to be able to drive some of these justices off the case when they can. And that's very dangerous for the court and the rule of law because, as Kyle suggested, you're going to have groups willy-nilly saying you recuse, and you'll have further embroiling the court in politics instead of hearing these cases on the merits.
Look, let's be clear. The facts do not matter to these people, as is clearly evidenced by this ProPublica hit job. We were talking about the disclosure laws. Simple fact. He did not violate any disclosure laws, okay? At the time that this trip happened, the justices were not required to disclose travel, private travel, and personal hospitality. The judicial conference has since changed those rules. Now they must report them, but they didn't have to at the time. And moreover, as you mentioned, there was an appellate court judge that specifically called the people who give advice on this and was said, no, you do not need to report this. Similarly on the recusal, Justice Alito has said that he had no idea of this Paul Singer's involvement in any of the cases that came before the court. By the way, there were 7 cert petitions that tangentially involved his company that the court actually rejected. The court accepted one that had to do with Argentine debt. It was decided 7-1 in the end. And by the way, this was 6 years ago. So it wouldn't have mattered if Justice Alito had recused anyway. It wouldn't have changed the outcome of the case. But the bigger point is that Singer's name never appeared on any cert petition or any document regarding the Argentine debt case. And Alito notes that his law clerks looked for those things and nothing was there. But this doesn't matter to these people, okay? These are activist journalists who are only writing stories about one side of the court because the goal here is to pressure conservative justices to step down from cases, to recuse themselves so that they can swing the outcome of certain decisions. And the very clear reason here is this is about the left still furious that they've lost control of the court, which they counted on for decades as a way to impose their own priorities when they couldn't get them through Congress. That's what's going on here. And that's the way everyone has to look at this. And you're right. They're very clear-headed about what they're doing. And we need to be equally clear about setting the record straight.
All right. You're going to get the last word, Kim.
As in my household, yes.
But not the last word on the Supreme Court, which we will be covering tomorrow. Big decisions expected tomorrow or next week on a couple of big cases, racial preferences and student loan forgiveness. But thank you all for listening. Thanks to Kyle and Kim. And we'll be back tomorrow, as usual, with another edition of Potomac Watch.